Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry, I had not unmuted myself. I apologize for that. Welcome to RosieCon Book Festival, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Diane Rogers. I am the school librarian at Ben Davis Ninth Grade Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am also the founding member of RosieCon Book Festival. I'm very pleased that everyone has decided to join us today for our festival's third author panel for the 2021-2022 school year about graphic nonfiction. RosieCon chooses which books and authors to invite to the festival based upon the titles each year that are on the Elliott Rosewater, Indiana High School book list. All authors and illustrators for the 25 titles are invited to participate. For various reasons, mostly scheduling conflicts, it's always possible for all invitees to attend. It isn't always possible, for all invitees to attend. In case you didn't know, the Rosewater list is a recommended reading list of contemporary titles for Indiana teens. The list is renewed and refreshed every school year with new and exciting books. It is sponsored by the Indiana Library Federation. Near the end of each school year, teens from across the state will vote for their favorite book, and the winning title is given the Rosewater Award. Voting is online and is currently open. So go to rosiebookaward.com, that's ROSIE bookaward.com, and vote. Voting is open through the first week of May every school year. Before I give the mic and camera over to the authors and the moderator, let me take a second to thank our festival sponsors. Money and support has been provided by the Lilly Endowment for the Arts, the Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund, and my school district, Wayne Township Schools. Without the support of these organizations, RosieCon Book Festival would not be possible, and we are currently in its fourth year. Finally, enough introduction, right? So let's begin our panel. I want to introduce our moderator for today, Laura Jones. Laura currently works for the Indiana State Library and is the former chair of the Elliott Rosewater Book Committee. Welcome, Laura. It's great to have you with us today. Take it away.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to talk to our panelists. First, I'm going to introduce you to both Justin and Harmony, and then we'll get started with some questions. So Harmony Becker is a cartoonist and illustrator. She illustrated George Takei's graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy, published by Top Shelf in 2019, which won an Eisner Award in 2020. She recently both authored and illustrated her first solo graphic novel, Himwari House, which was published on November 9th, 2021 by First Second. Welcome, Harmony, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
First. And next we have Justin Eisinger. Justin is the co-author of the New York Times bestselling graphic memoir, They Called Us Enemy, George Takei's story of childhood internment. During a career of more than a dozen years immersed in graphic storytelling, a fateful encounter with March author and civil rights pioneer, Congressman John Lewis, inspired Eisinger to turn his experience adapting television episodes and film towards bringing engaging nonfiction stories to readers. Born in Akron, Ohio, he lives in San Diego, California, with his wife and 2 dogs, and in his spare time, publishes North America's only inline skating magazine. Welcome, Justin, and thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much, Laura. Thanks, Diane. I feel like I got to cut that bio down. It's too long if people are going to read it. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. All right, so let me start with asking you, Justin, if you could please summarize the story, They Called Us Enemy. I think summaries always sound better coming straight from the writer, so I'll let you, if you could summarize it for us, please.
Yeah, sure. George Takei was 4 years old, living with his family in Los Angeles when in 1945, I believe it was 1945. Now I'm realizing I should have done my homework before I picked up the book. President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which decided that all Americans of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast, primarily the West Coast of the United States, would be moved into a series of 10 what they were calling relocation camps, which were essentially internment or concentration camps, to be housed isolated from the rest of society for an indeterminate amount of time. They're given a very little warning, and basically lost all their possessions. For 120,000 plus people lost their possessions during this forced migration. And this story is really about the effect that had on George, on his family, and the larger story is sort of how it happened, why it happened, and then ultimately the impact it had on George's life and his mission as an individual.
Okay, thank you for that. And next, I kind of want to talk about you and Harmony and your writing process and working as a team on this graphic novel. So kind of like things like, how did you get paired together first to work on the project, and then maybe talk a little bit about your writing process. So if you want to start, Harmony, and then we can also go on to Justin.
Yeah, so I came onto this project when the script was already underway. I was brought on by our editor, Lee Walton. I had been publishing sort of like self-published copies of my what's now my graphic novel, but at the time was a webcomic at indie book festivals and things like that. And he saw my work and he asked me if I'd be interested in working on a project about the Japanese American experience. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that sounds like me. So I think I'd like to do that. And a couple months later, I was brought onto the project. And it wasn't until I agreed to do it, though, that I realized that it was going to be for George Takei and it was going to be about this experience specifically. But yeah, the rest is basically history.
Okay. And then if you'd like to talk a little bit about your writing process working as a team with Justin.
Yeah, I mean, by the time that I got the script, it was already written. But it was the first time that I had ever written from a comic script. Before, I had always just kind of drawn and written at the same time. But it really was a eye-opening experience to like how much easier and more streamlined the process is when working with multiple people to make things kind of as clear as possible. So yeah, it was my first time working from a comic script. It was very like well laid out and everything, but it was kind of more just like rather than being sort of a thing that kind of went back and forth and was very collaborative. It was kind of like I had received the script, I did my part and then sent it back and would get feedback and then work a little bit more and then kind of went back and forth like that.
Okay, great.
I think Harmony's simplifying a couple processes where we really did had a lot of close collaboration, because as a writer and someone who's not a master of the visual domain like my colleague here, Ms. Becker, we're sort of restricted to just thinking. For me, it's easier to think sort of as a camera, right? And so I would think a lot about writing the script as sort of like, what would I want a camera to show if I were in control of something that I can't draw anything, but I could take a picture. So what would I want to show if I was capturing this moment? And so in a way, my colleague Stephen Scott and I, and working with George, we almost wrote more of a film script in a way than a graphic novel script, because for one thing, it's such a harrowing story. You could just feel it in your bones, and you could hear musical cues in your mind sometimes when you were writing these scenes, because it was fitting together so well. But anyway, that aside, there was plenty of points when we were doing research online, looking at photographs, looking at stuff, trying to describe a scene or a setting. And Harmony, to her credit, went on a tour of some of the locations that were in the book. And so Harmony went to I forget what camps she went to, Harmony, and I don't want to misstate the facts, but Harmony went to some locations. I think she might have even gone. Anyway, Harmony went to some locations to see things for herself, like the Santa Anita racetrack, and I think she went somewhere to one of the camps to get like an idea of the lay of the land. And so we started to find out that sometimes what we saw online and what Harmony could find even by visiting would be contradicted by George's memories or sort of his experiences. And so we would have to go back and we would do a lot of collaboration on those scenes, making sure we got things sort of really gelling together. What I'll say is that we were so blessed to have Lee find Harmony on this fateful day when they crossed paths, because the story, what we've come to learn, I didn't necessarily know this when we started this book, was that people would tell us, oh, it's so hard to draw a story from a child's perspective and to draw children in the story without sometimes feeling like you're really pandering or you're sort of ostracizing other parts of your audience. Not to mention overlaying with so much like true history and nonfiction. Harmony did this incredible job synthesizing all those things together, making a story that's accessible, that's warm, that deals with a lot of challenging, heartbreaking moments and really like confounding, bureaucratic stuff, and made it all really come together. So we were so fortunate to be able to have this collaboration.
Okay, great. For Harmony, question about how did you decide which plot elements that you were going to illustrate versus what to have in Word format?
Well, that was something that wasn't a decision that I made. That was things that were kind of already decided by the script itself. And yeah, to Justin and Stephen's credit, I mean, it was such a like clear path that I feel like he's giving me too much credit for what I did, but honestly, it was like everything that's included, everything that is chosen to be shown was chosen by Justin and Stephen and George. So I was just kind of the one who then turned those words into pictures. But yeah, so why don't you go ahead and elaborate on what you chose to show rather than tell, Justin?
Sure. Thanks, Harmony. There's an adage in comics and graphic novels, and it's probably in cinema as well, and it's show, don't tell. And so, we were fortunate, and I don't have a copy behind me right now, but George had written an autobiography, a prose autobiography in the 90s, in 92 or 94, called To the Stars. And so he'd already done a written account of a lot of this time of his life that had been out and been seen for quite a while. And so we were really fortunate to be able to use that as a springboard for kind of launching our story. A lot of the background was covered here. We didn't have to go have George retread all these memories exactly. We kind of just start from square one. Was fairly advanced because of the existence of this autobiography. That said, sort of part of, to answer part of your question, Laura, part of it was just reading the autobiography and just seeing what really jumped out at us as visual scenes, right? Is the things that were just obviously explained well visually. And then, whether it's the scene of driving around in the Jeep or just again, some things just really being pulled out of their home in Los Angeles. You just have to show those things because that's how you bridge that empathetic gap between an audience, and you help somebody put them in those shoes and imagine happening to themselves. And so a lot of it was that, and then, but that was really only half the story because that's really George's experience of what happened. What we realized was that there really wasn't an account of from the other, not the other side, because we're not trying to both sides this thing, but of how it happened. Who were the lawmakers that took advantage of this hysteria and use it as an opportunity to ram laws through Congress, through the House, across the president's desk that were ultimately really racist, right? That did a lot to ostracize, again, huge swaths of the public. And so there was a lot of research going into finding what were the pivotal moments in on that side of things that let this all happen. And so that was where a lot of research was done to find, who were the crankiest old white men in power that were essentially the ones saying, that was really sort of became an obvious way to show things that needed to be shown that probably had been written about but never really shown or had a bright light shined on them. Look what this person said about Japanese Americans, and think about that. Mm-hmm. And think about if they were saying that about you or your family or your friends or your relatives. And I think that's one of the powers that we tapped into with the story that ultimately has resonated. And it's probably why we're here talking about the book today.
All right. And then this question could be for either of you, but I'll let Harmony start and give you a little break there. Could you describe what it was like working with George or your interactions with him? I don't know how much your interactions were since you got it afterwards, but.
Yeah, I mean, the couple of times that I managed to meet George, I just find him I was really amazed by how good his memory is of his childhood. He remembered so many very small details about the rooms that they lived in, how the furniture was laid out, how I mean, even when it contradicted Google and things like that, I was really amazed by how well he remembered these things. And just as a person, I don't know, I just find him he's very inspiring to be around. He's very, I think he's very aware of the, what's the word that I want to use, of his, of what he means to a lot of people. And he always puts his best foot forward to, he's aware that in every interaction, he might be meeting somebody who, he means a lot to them. And he's always prepared and ready to be what those people need, but also just to be, I don't know, he's just very kind and very empathetic, so well-spoken. He reminds me of very much of a kind of Shakespeare actor. So yeah, and I found it very also moving how dedicated he was to telling this story, and to especially how dedicated he was, not dedicated, but sort of he was very committed to telling the story for his parents and for giving back to them sort of what they had given to him and passing that on and not letting the story be forgotten. And yeah, I was very impressed by his commitment to that and to his own family, and letting them kind of carving them out a place in history for them.
Wonderful.
I
Justin,
like the
could
way
you
you
tell us about
I like the way you put that, Harmony, carving out a place for them in history. That's really cool. Yeah, working with George has been really amazing experience. And to Harmony's point, I mean, just being close to someone who can command that kind of attention, and then watching them, use it for good was really refreshing during the past 4 years. And so that was a nice thing to see, and a good life lesson just in general, to never take any interaction for granted, right? You really don't know who you're crossing paths with, and you certainly don't know the story that's going on with anybody when you come in contact with them. To that point, one of the things that George did tell Stephen and I really early on in our writing process was that his story, and the fact that he even knew his own story, the fact that George Takei knew the story of his parents' internment was itself quite unusual, because there was, as he came to explain to us, there was a propensity amongst Japanese Americans that had been interned to not talk about it. I don't want to speculate on the reasons for doing that necessarily, but there was a kind of a cultural decision that we want to put this out of our collective memory. We don't want this to cloud our legacy forever. We're going to move forward. We're going to go do good. Out of that have been born some other stereotypes that maybe are really looked at more unfavorably these days. So that's a whole other conversation. But nonetheless, because of the lack of inter-family communication about this chapter of history, George explained to us that he meets a lot of Japanese Americans that do not know, or they may know that their relatives were experienced the internment, but they don't know where they were ever interned. They don't know any details about what they have, where they were located, what really happened, which struck us as pretty amazing. Like, we know that I'm surprised to hear that there's not more. For example, I grew up around a lot of Jewish families, and a lot of those Jewish families all knew the story of their family members who had escaped the Holocaust, right? There was a lot of that was passed down very openly, and it's almost a point of pride amongst a lot of families. Not so much in the Japanese American community. So it's a bit of an outlier that George knew the story, but even more so, he said, we will see this during signings. We'll see this during events, and he was absolutely right. So I mean, during some of our big Comic-Con signings or other big group events, Harmony and Stephen and George, and we've all been lined up there, and we've had people come through, and as they're waiting to meet George, to regale us with stories about their own family background, and we would ask them, "Oh, do you know where your grandmother was interned?" And they would say, "No, we never talked about it." And we really, to hear that and understand it so personally, really even makes our part of what we've done to help, as Harmony said, help carve out a piece in the story, not just for George's parents, but for a lot of families that experience that, is something that I don't think we understood the depths we were wading into when we really started, taking on some of that responsibility.
Yeah, I want to quickly add something to that. I just, I feel, of course, there's no obligation for anybody who's gone through this kind of trauma to share it with, I mean, not only their own families, but with the world at large. And I think it was I don't want to at all put any blame or shame around people who did not share their own story, because it's understandable that you would want to move on and want to forget it. But at the same time, George recognized how painful that must have been for his own parents to share that with him. And we in turn also recognized the weight of that responsibility. So I think I don't want to put any, on one hand, I don't want to put a good job on George's parents for doing the right thing. But at the same time, I just want to recognize, I suppose, how difficult that must have been for them, and how sensitive George was to that. And just, I feel very, I admire the entire family for the way that they managed it, and how George himself has also been very delicate in the way that he's shared his own story with the world.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, it does sound very admirable. And also you mentioned his photographic memory, that he was able to remember those details. That's amazing. And also it turned out very wonderful for the graphic novel. Let's see. Let me ask you, Justin, are there a certain is there a certain I'm trying to think of the word. Let me just start over. What are some steps that you would normally follow, like a progression of steps that you would normally follow when writing a graphic novel?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to answer a question like that. So typically it starts with, well, if I'm getting really granular, it starts with a pitch, and the pitch is where your idea goes from being something you tell people about excitedly that you have a good idea to where the rubber meets the road, and you put it down on paper and you actually have something to hand people and say, hey, here's my pitch. Once you've gone through that whole process and hurdle and sort of gotten the, or even if you've just written down an idea for yourself, this is what I want to do, you would then progress on to an outline stage where you're basically going to try to imagine the broad strokes of the story you're setting out to tell. You know, if we're thinking in a classic structure, that's 3 acts. It's an opening, a climax, a climax, and then sort of conclusion, and it's a good place to start. And then slowly filling it in a little bit more as you think about it. It doesn't hurt, of course, to find other books that you like and read them a lot and look at them and pick them apart a little bit more than just from an entertainment standpoint, but really look about whether it's a graphic novel or a poem or a prose story. Really look at it and think about the mechanics of how the words got it on the page and what they mean and how they're assembled. And that will give you a good roadmap. And so, for example, for myself, real quickly, I spent years working on adapting television episodes and movies into screen grab books, which is essentially taking a photo of the image on the screen and putting it with changing the dialogue some to make it work to put it in the book. It's not the most creative work in the world, but it teaches you a lot about how these stories are assembled. And it also tells you a lot about learning, again, to adapt, which means, okay, this episode has a big crazy fight scene and it's all this really great action happening over here, but it looks like it doesn't look right on the page. So, okay, well, I'm going to throw that out and change things. So the outlining process is a little bit of understanding that you can do that and filling in the blanks to think about how would you tell the story the way you want to do it. After you've got an outline completed, then congratulations, you've reached maybe the hardest step, which is sitting down to actually start writing. And that's the best advice I can give anyone is just start and don't worry about what's coming out of your fingers onto your keyboard. Just start going. If it's garbage, keep going and you will find the thing you're trying to do. It might come easy, it might come hard, and different times, different days, it can change one way or the other, but you just have to keep going and that will help you figure it out.
Awesome. Great advice for the process there. Harmony, do you remember, or can you tell us a little bit, was there a certain panel or portion of the novel that was the most difficult for you to try to illustrate?
Yes, there were a lot of really challenging scenes in this book. Actually, quickly, can I just piggyback on what Justin said?
Sure. Yes, please.
I don't think that I realized this at the time. Well, actually, I suppose I did, but Justin and Stephen did a really good job of laying out exactly how they wanted. They would put up the details so clearly up to the point of this person should be standing on this side and this person should be standing here and this person is in the background doing this. And you do kind of have to have a more or less an idea of visual storytelling to be able to do that. So yeah, I mean, it's not just that they were writing, but that they were also kind of drawing a visual map for me that I would then translate. And without having that prior knowledge, I feel like it would have been a lot more difficult to do my job, but they made it very clear for me. And then to answer your question, there were a lot of pretty challenging scenes in this book. For me, the most challenging thing to draw is generally vehicles and crowd scenes. So I had a really hard time with those. There's a lot of crowd scenes in this book. I think especially one that I had a lot of trouble with. I don't remember exactly what page it is, but it's a full page panel of the moment that they're arriving at the Santa Anita racetrack, and it's kind of from above, and it's got a lot of people, and it's got a bus, and it's got a big building. That one was really challenging. Yeah.
I have it. It's right here.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, here's a good
And,
question for,
oh, well,
for you.
real quickly, speaking of vehicles, we made Harmony draw exploding planes and
Oh.
battleships and jeeps and all kinds of things she had to draw. So
Luckily, there's a lot of reference on Google for, especially like World War II, like exploding planes and that sort of thing. So it wasn't too bad. There's
Unfortunately, there's a lot of reference to that. It's true.
unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. This can be for both of you. I'll let I'll let Justin start. How did you first get into the line of business that you're in, whether for you writing and for Harmony, illustrating and writing?
Great. Well, what I'll say to anybody, student or adult watching, is you never know how things are going to work out, right? And so I was in college studying communications and public relations. I wanted to be like a hotshot PR guy for some big corporation or whatever. I ended up studying news writing as an elective at one point. And it turns out I really liked it. I really liked the sort of creative problem solving and trying to figure out what's going on and how can you explain it, how you're allowed to talk about it publicly, et cetera, et cetera. And that led me to, when I got done with college, I took a job writing for like a weekly newspaper in North Carolina, which led me into like monthly periodical stuff. And so really it's just been a serpentine sort of road. And as I was mentioning before we got on the call started, what led me into comics was just the fact that I lost a magazine I was working for, went out of business in 2006. And so I did what any like person in 2006 would have done when faced with the lack of employment. I went to Craigslist and I hit Craigslist, and thanks to my sort of background in periodical editorial, I found that the comic book company here in San Diego was looking to hire somebody and as an editor to kind of do what I already knew how to do, is working with freelancers, moving things around, trafficking files and stuff. And so I said, sure, let me do that. That went from being fairly low level functionary to eventually being in a position to, help bring this book into top shelf, and then eventually take on the duties of helping spearhead it to being written. So I've told a couple different classes, you never know what's going to happen. I wrote my first graphic novel script when I was 40 years old. So you just never stop learning, never stop trying.
Awesome. How about you, Harmony? When did you first get into illustrating and writing?
I mean, I've kind of always done it since I was a child. My sister and I used to like draw comics for each other, and we would pretend that we would like write a little section of like Q&A, even though we were our only other reader. So I've been I've been doing comics since I was a little kid. There was a while when I was I wanted to study animation after high school, but various life things happened that never ended up actually becoming anything. But I had kind of had the approach to visual storytelling that I got from animation, specifically like Western animation and the Disney approach, I suppose. And from there, I don't know, I had been kind of trying to break my way into the industry without a formal education. That wasn't really working out. I ended up instead kind of trying to do my own thing. I was trying to be sort of like freelance through Instagram. And then somehow I ended up like self-publishing some comics on Instagram that got a decent amount of traction. And then I just kind of built up from there, kind of doing more and more long form stories and going to sort of like indie comic cons and indie festivals and that sort of thing, and started meeting editors. Met the editor for They Called Us Enemy, and yeah, I think I have a much shorter professional history, but I suppose I started as in terms of illustration, I started very young. So.
Okay, awesome. And also at this time, I just want to remind the audience that you guys can feel free, if you have a question for Harmony or Justin, you can put those in the using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we do have a question that came in earlier from Avon High School. And the question is, what kind of emotional journey have both of you taken as you worked through such a heartbreaking topic and experience in American history? So if you want to start, Justin.
Sure. It's been a tough one. The book sort of born of the idea that American government has done some very questionable, morally repugnant, racist stuff in the past. And in 2016, in October of 2016, when this book idea first came so it took shape, there was a concern that we were headed down a path to not have learned from our mistakes and repeat a lot of those actions again. And as I started writing this book in 2017 and for me, research on a book about American concentration camps sort of started with a study into some of the German museums that document how communities sort of allowed the Holocaust to take shape and take root in Europe. And so I started reading this history about these people that had survived and experienced the onset of the German Holocaust. And I'm listening to the news in my home as I'm writing at night, and I'm starting to just get this really bad feeling that there's too many common threads between the story we're setting out to tell, what I'm reading about with historical precedent of how society sort of got to where it was, and then what's happening like right now on the news. And it started putting some more urgency sort of in my mind of like, what we're doing, what's really got to be, what are some of the takeaways we have to make sure land in the story, and et cetera. So that very much was a realization that the past isn't as past as we like to think it is. And so George's message of sort of, learning from our mistakes and, participating really became like, this is really, really, really important. This is more than just a nice idea. This is really, really important that this is an idea we can seed out there into the world and help more people maybe decide to do that. And so then to finally put a final point on this, it was a challenging book with a lot of really heartbreaking moments to write. And I learned early on that if I wrote this, if I had done my job well, my eyes were all watery by the time I got to the end of a scene that I was working on, because there was so much emotion flying around. It was impossible to not get upset and frustrated or angry many times during the writing process at what we were having to explain on page. So I know that was a lengthy answer. I'm sorry for that.
No, that's fine. Very, very good. Thank you. How about you, Harmony? What can you say about the emotional journey?
I think I had a very different journey. Oh, wait, I had like everything in my head that I was going to say, and I just like flew out the window. Wait, okay. So, I mean, I did also have that sort of similar process of feeling like, okay, I need to really put myself into this. And if I, kind of that same thing of like, if I am crying by the time I'm done with the scene, that I've like done my job. But I had a kind of distinct journey in two sort of separate forks with my personal experience with the story. I came into the project as a very cynical millennial sort of feeling. I don't think that I've ever felt patriotic in my life. I don't have a whole lot of hope or pride in my country. Not a whole lot of, I most of the time I feel kind of ashamed of my country. But working with George, getting to know him and getting to know his perspective on the United States and the kind of idealism and patriotism that he holds on to, despite everything that the United States government put him and his family through and countless other people, I found it at the beginning very confusing, and it didn't make any sense to me. I was thinking kind of like, I don't really understand why you would want to continue to like have faith in a country that betrayed you that in that way. But I did kind of slowly, I don't think it was even until after the book was finished and I was starting to do interviews that it kind of hit me like, that's a really beautiful faith to have, and that requires so much like internal strength to continue to believe in the potential of what your country could be, and also to recognize the opportunities that it has allowed so many people to recognize both the opportunities and the ways that we've hurt so many people, to kind of keep our eyes open to both of those things at the same time, but continue to have faith in our country, have faith in who we are, and to accept ourselves as being allowed to be here as American people. I say here, I'm not even in the United States right now, but to kind of, yeah, I mean, it's something that I still don't think that I'm not on the same page as George. I mean, given the fact that I don't even live in the United States, but I just found it very moving, and that it requires so much faith and so much like internal strength to be able to continue to invest in a country that's betrayed you. That was so moving for both George and especially his father, who was an adult at the time that this happened. So yeah, I think that was one of the most impressive things for me. I also had a little bit of internal conflict. Also, after the book was published, in a lot of interviews, I was being kind of, I don't know what the word is, put into a little bit of a box, because I'm Japanese American, but I don't have any personal experience with the internment camps. But I felt it's not racism, but I suppose just sort of an assumption that I am going to have a personal connection to the story because I'm Japanese American. And that was kind of a weird thing for me to grapple with, in kind of coming up against the assumptions that people had of like, well, because you're from this country, then you must have had this emotional experience. And yeah, so that was another kind of weird thing that I experienced. But I think above all, it was mostly just kind of feeling very moved by George and by the love that he has for his country and the commitment that he has to the United States.
Great, thank you. Your answer is a very touching tribute to the kind of influence that George has actually too. Here's a question that either of you could answer, and we can start with Justin. This is kind of my fun question for the day. Does it frustrate you as the creator of this novel that you spend years writing and illustrating and working on the graphic novel, but readers can read through them very quickly? Do you want to speak to that?
I think that's actually one of the best parts about the medium, is the ability to distill difficult concepts into a very palatable, consumable format that, if you're fortunate, will be discovered and cross sort of like readerships and find a way to break across different sort of barriers. And so I think we've become incredibly fortunate to have created a book that has somehow managed to do that. To see the adoption from school systems has been overwhelming. To think about that there are tens of thousands of students out there right now reading a book that we kind of brought into the world is very humbling. I mean, I know how important the books I read as a student were on helping create my worldview and sort of, giving me some shape to some of my ideas that I probably still hold dear. So I think that's a gift, and I know, since I'm known for my wordy answers, I'll give one last one. I was working when I met the Congressman John Lewis. One of the things I was doing was I was videotaping crowd interactions with him during his signings at San Diego Comic-Con. And one of those, maybe the second time I had this position or had worked with them kind of that way, I saw a gentleman buy the book by March 1, 2, maybe even 3, as he got in line to wait for the congressman's signature. And there was a long line. The congressman was not being expeditious that day. And so it's probably about an hour and a half or 2 hour line wait to get to meet the congressman. And in that time, this gentleman had read the first book and part of book 2 and was just really emotional. And I mean, that most people don't buy an author's book, read the whole book in line, and then get to have that transformative experience in front of the author. I saw it happen there. I saw it happen a few times with They Called Us Enemy. And it was, like I said, in one way it's reductive. All this years of work is just taken down like kind of like a quick chaser or something, but it is ultimately the gift of like that. You don't even have to, it's as long as a movie, maybe, an hour and a half, 2 hours. You can digest it in one sitting and put it in your mental in the mental oven. See where it goes.
All right, great answer there. Harmony, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. It's such a digestible medium. It's such like I agree. I think it's like the best medium for digesting complex ideas in a way that's like accessible and easy to understand and quick to understand. Speaking from my own experience, not only on this book but also just on the book that I just released, I think of sort of working on the book for me, it's the reward. Like the process itself is the reward, and everything that comes after is just kind of a bonus. Or I feel that that's the way that I sort of need to work in order to, I suppose, like get the most out of the work that I do, to not sort of rely too much on the external accolades, but to rather kind of take satisfaction from the process itself. And from this book that I just finished working on, it definitely, I mean, putting my entire self into it, and doing the best that I can to express the ideas that I have, to translate the ideas that other have into a visual form, to accurately portray emotions, to accurately portray experiences. That's, I suppose, kind of like the reward in and of itself. And I mean, the book that I just finished working on, it honestly like kind of got me through the pandemic, because it gave me like a purpose. It gave me something to do every day, something to focus on. And I honestly felt kind of like very lonely after it was over. There's an artist named Umino Chika who did a series that I really love called Honey and Clover. And she wrote this comic after she finished the series. And she said that the characters, she drew herself in the living room with all of the characters of the series. And she said, after finishing the series, it felt like all of the characters who had been my roommates for 10 years suddenly just all moved out at once. And I really related to that feeling. I felt kind of like actually very lonely after finishing it. I was like, now what do I put in my brain? Who's going to live in my brain now? It's kind of a similar experience every time I finish working on a project.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that, the readers, we feel like that when we finish, when we finish a book or finish a series. What am I going to do with myself now?
I'm feeling that way too. I'm starting to like fill myself with other people's characters, and then the series finishes and I'm like, I need someone in my brain.
Yep, I can attest to that. And then while we're talking about kind of like people's reaction to the graphic novel medium, what would either of you or both of you say to critics of reading graphic novels? I know I was a school librarian for a while, and I always had such a hard time when some of the kids were told like, well, you have to read they would say like, read real books, not graphic novels. And I would just fight for them. Like, these are real books, and these have so much going on, and there's such great benefits to these. But I don't know. There's still critics. So what would you have to say to the critics of graphic novels?
I would say get over it. It kind of feels like it's like, I mean, it's definitely, I feel like it's changing the last couple of years. It's becoming a lot more accepted, and people are being more open to the idea. But for me, I always found that kind of strange because I grew up reading manga, and there's manga for literally every subject that you could think of, like how to drive a car. I'm sure there's a manga for that, or like what it feels like to be an older person, or like historical manga. There's literally manga about everything that you could possibly think of. And there's not really a whole lot of stigma in Japan about like not reading manga. I mean, there's a little bit, but at the same, it's so much like a part of the culture. Like you just read a magazine and there's a manga teaching you about like in the lifestyle section about like how to clean your carpet. So for me, it was like a little bit unexpected when I like got into this industry, and I was like, oh, people don't read comics. That's interesting. But yeah, I mean, why would you limit yourself to one medium? Like it just seems kind of strange to like, why would you only want words when you can have words and pictures?
Right.
Like, why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of that, I think some of that too is just, the long history of comics and graphic novels, right? And so where we are now is quite a ways from where things sort of started. And if your experience with comics was maybe only in the early 80s or late 70s as an educator or a librarian, you might not have a really high opinion of it as anything other than disposable sort of distractions. So I can sort of see that, but of course it's changed so much. And I can share a story. I worked at, I've been to several BEA events throughout the history of BEA. Probably the first one I really paid attention to was maybe about 10 years ago. And I called it Graphic Novel 101 because I remember working in the graphic novel aisle that day at my publisher. And we had, maybe it wasn't even 10 years ago because March was already out. So, but it was like the first year that Top Shelf was part of the IDW family. And so we were there. And I remember spending the whole day explaining to just hundreds of people, hey, yeah, this is a really cool medium. And look at the range. We have this nonfiction story that's about the Congressman John Lewis and his battle against racism and institutionalized racism. And here's a book about My Little Pony. We look at the breadth here, and it was sort of in that conversation that I had a lot of people have their aha moments. That was actually a really great weekend because I had a lot of those aha moments of, oh my gosh, I didn't know, I didn't realize. And a lot of catalogs got handed out, and years later it's completely different. The graphic novels have taken over so many of the shows, taken over big conventions because to your point, we've seen it. And I don't know how many times I've had educators and teachers and librarians come up and say, we can't get enough of your book in the classroom, or I put multiple copies of this out every week and they get taken. And then it becomes a story about how people just take books and everyone's happy about people just taking books, which I think is a great phenomenon in a world where everyone's concerned about, possessions and stuff. And so that's something that I think we've all been kind of paying attention to.
Okay. We do have another question that came in from the Q&A. It is, do you have a least favorite or favorite part of the project? So if you want to start with that, Harmony.
Least favorite? I think, well, the most challenging part, I mean, I didn't have to do it on this project. Writing is the most challenging part for me. And I guess after that, it would be thumbnailing because, once you get to inking and toning things, it's generally everything is, you already have like the bones of it. But putting down that initial outline is so challenging. I wouldn't say it's my least favorite part because it is also like very exciting, but it is very hard. It's the part that I struggle with the most, I think, both writing and thumbnailing, just kind of going from how do I turn these words into pictures and how do I turn these images in my head into words? That bit is always hard. Favorite part is for me generally like color and shading and toning and that sort of thing, because for me it's it's very relaxing. I don't have to use a lot of brain power. It's maybe because I've had a lot of practice with it, it feels more automatic at this point. I just kind of enjoy and I'm on cruise control. So that part's always fun for me.
Well, hey, that tracks, Harmony, because adult coloring books have been huge for years now, and it's because people just want to sort of color and kind of zone out. And I'm sure, to your point, with all your experience, it's more than just zoned out. It's very subconscious, calculated, but you just get to sort of just let it come. It's cool.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have a least favorite or favorite part, Justin?
Oh my gosh, yeah. The most fun is like the conceptualizing, right? And the kind of like the early points where everyone's getting excited and you got your outline and your pitch and you're all ready to go. The worst part is all the waiting. Graphic novel, writing at all is a very solitary, creating is usually a very solitary endeavor, right? Whether you're Harmony drawing all the time or whether myself, researching and writing, those are solitary endeavors where you are by yourself a lot with your own thoughts, with your own time. And there's a lot of ways to really enjoy that and take a lot of satisfaction from that, which I think Harmony spoke to earlier, sort of about this. The doing is a huge part of what makes it great. Like if you've told yourself you want to be something and then you get to actually be that thing, which means doing the thing you said you want to be, that is a reward in itself that really can keep you going. But there's a lot of waiting, right? There's like right now, I've got some pitches out in the world. So I'm waiting to find out what I'll be, or I have to wait for a meeting to figure out, is the outline, whatever. Like there's just always to sort of stop and wait. And that's probably the worst part of the process is that once you get into professional capacity, it's difficult to just, you've gotten where you wanted to get, but you sort of, there's more hoops to jump through, I guess. And so as I talked about a long time ago, Laura, I said this, what are the steps of writing? I was like, oh, you make your pitch, you make your outline, you sit down, you start writing. That gets more complicated when you have to wait for everybody, all the gatekeepers along the way to tell you when you can.
Right. It looks like a question just came in for you. It seems like you have written a lot of nonfiction graphic novels. Is that a choice for you? And are there reasons for that choice?
Oh, was that isn't for me? For me? Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I've written primarily more probably film adaptation stuff, which is just sort of popcorn. But this is definitely my most important thing I've worked on, and it's definitely a turning point for me professionally. Yes, I have very much. I had an aha moment a few years ago, recognizing that with the which is the commercial popularity of young reader and middle grade graphic novels being so popular, being such a driving force in publishing, and let's call it a challenge of teaching history and getting kids to retain and pay attention to history and sort of like important stuff, difficult concepts, and then also the power of the graphic novel to be a delivery vehicle for those complicated topics. All those things sort of hit in my mind after my experience of working in publishing, and was like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to bring my journalism into this whole idea and go tell nonfiction stories, try to find stories that will make you go, oh, I didn't know that, or I had no idea that. And maybe through that, you have a better awareness of the world around us, and this is really hokey and corny. And then, so I'm going to say it anyway. And it's sort of an investment in the future, not even mine. It's an investment in the future for all of us. And maybe it's my version of the hope that George and his family had for the United States. It's an idea that if we can help educate people and let individuals have more information of their own, good information, they will maybe be able to make better choices and have live their best lives. And I think if that happens for more people, we'll all be better off in a big collective fashion. So it's utopian idealism at its most granular, but one mind at a time.
Yes, I love that. It's very important. Lastly, it looks like we're almost out of time here, but I do have a question I wanted to ask Harmony. And then I'm kind of curious about your what you have work in progress going on. But Harmony, I know you just released a book a week ago. If you want to tell us a little bit about that, or maybe give us a sneak peek on what's next in your writing, illustrating plans.
Yeah, I guess I'll do both of those. I'm making sure I wasn't muted. So I just finished releasing Himawari House, which is my graphic novel that is about 3 girls who live together in a share house in Tokyo. They are from different countries. One is from, she's of Japanese and American heritage, and she's coming back to Japan to rediscover her lingual heritage. There is one character who's from Korea and then another character from Singapore, and they just kind of I follow them over the course of the year as they kind of get their hearts broken and they start to become more independent, and they learn about themselves and they fail and they succeed, and just kind of a slice of life and the lives of these girls, and just kind of a little bit of a nostalgic recollection for me of my early 20s. It's a lot of fun. It's written in 3 different languages. And yeah, you will laugh and cry and you will want to eat a lot of food. So that's basically nice summary of that one. Same as Justin, I've got a couple of projects up in the air that I'm waiting around to start. And in the meantime, I've been doing a little bit of writing as well. That is, I'm rediscovering as I'm working on it how hard it is to write and how hard it is to come up with things just out of thin air. So yeah, it's challenging, but it's also fun at the same time.
All right. Well, I know you're both playing the waiting game, but I hope you both hear something soon. I look forward to seeing more from both of you.
Thanks very much.
And I just want to thank you guys both for taking the time today. I don't think we have time for a lot more questions, but I think Diane's back, so I'll let her take it away.
Awesome. Thank you guys. It has been a fantastic panel. Harmony, Justin, Laura, for participating today. I greatly appreciate your time and attention. Audience, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed yourself, and please don't forget to vote for your favorite Rosewater title on this year's list. Voting is online at rosiebookaward.com. That's ROSIE bookaward.com. Today was only the third of 9 total panels that we will have for the RosieCon Book Festival this school year. You can see a complete list on our website, and you can find that website by just Googling RosieCon Book Festival, and you'll be able to see the list of everything. Our next panel is in 2 weeks on December 2nd. We'll feature Jennifer Donaldson, Adriana Mather, and Gretchen McNeil, some wonderful women writing crazy, scary murder mysteries, which will be perfect for the month of September, right? I mean, December, pardon me. So educators, don't forget that you can access today's session on the festival YouTube site if you want to show it again and again for your classes, or if you just need to fit it into your schedule. That's why we have it also recorded and posted onto YouTube. All right, everyone, be safe. Have a good day, and stay healthy, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, RosieCon. Everyone take care.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.